Okay, everybody, welcome to the Clobber passages. And this is class 2. Some of you are new to this class. If you didn't get to the first class, it is recorded. So all the classes are on YouTube. You can find them. And if you need a link to that, you just let me know and I can get you the link to the first recording. The first class we covered basically the kind of Bible challenges in the Bible versions that led to some of the difficulties that we're going into. And then we started in with Genesis. And then we hit a discussion about Lilith. So I want to do that for Tony because Tony had some questions about Lilith. So I'm going to just start with Tony's question so that we can hit that. And so here's what we're covering today: Sodom and Gomorrah, Esau and Jacob, Joseph and his Technicolor coat. But before we get there, let's talk about Lilith. So when we talked about the creation stories last week, Tony asked, well, okay, who's Lilith? So Lilith is not in the Bible in Genesis, right? Lilith is a figure from ancient Mesopotamian demonology. So not from Genesis, but if you remember your creation stories in Genesis, there's 2 creation stories, right? So there's Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And the theory is that these 2 Genesis stories led early rabbinic thinkers to imagine that maybe Adam had 2 separate wives. And that came up with this thinking that maybe Adam's first wife was called Lilith, drawing on this ancient Mesopotamian thinking, right? Okay, so since she was created at the first time as Adam, which is creation story number 1, Lilith insisted and demanded total equality. So that's where this is the story of Lilith, that she was equal to Adam and she refused to submit to Adam. So this is the story of Lilith. This is the myth of Lilith. And Adam refused to grant her equality. And so Lilith left because Adam would not meet her demands for equality. So the story goes, God sent angels after her and told her to get back, and she refused. And so the angels cursed her and all of her offsprings. And Lilith, in turn, basically cursed women in general and cursed labor, is the myth, right? And so throughout the centuries, when women had a stillbirth, they would actually blame Lilith. Now you can kind of read in the misogyny in here, right? Okay. Now Lilith the name Lilith does not appear in the Bible in Genesis. It appears one time, and it's in Isaiah. And it's in 1st Isaiah, and it goes, wild cats shall meet with hyenas, goat demons shall call to each other. There also Lilith shall repose and find a place to rest. So that's the only place that the name Lilith shows up in the whole Bible. Yeah. So by the medieval times, Lilith had become the grandmother of the devil, but also had become the patroness of witches and pagans. So now in most kind of manifestations that you see of Lilith, you see concepts of chaos, seduction, sexuality, ungodliness, and this kind of Lilith casting this spell or curse on humankind. If you can think of Michelangelo's painting of Eden, he is painting Lilith as the half woman, half serpent. So that's Lilith that he's painting. Yeah. Around that tree of knowledge. And then James Joyce is going to name Lilith as the patron of abortions. So again, misogyny in there. And then she goes on to be archived English poetry. Modern feminists are kind of reclaiming her and kind of celebrating her independence and her struggle from Adam. So let me just kind of stop there. That's the story of Lilith.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. And there's a phenomenal fiction book out there right now called Lilith that is good reading. So I'll leave it. Okay, before we dive in, questions, comments from last week, anything to follow up on? And in addition, did anybody get to see 1946 and offer any input? Okay. Thoughts, comments, reactions?
My gut reaction was all in your text message.
Do you want to share it, Chris?
I can't remember what I wrote in there now. Well, the big thing is, does anybody go to divinity school, and is any of this taught?
Yeah.
In
Chris,
divinity school.
Yeah, Chris said probably the most important documentary I ever watched. Why don't more people have this understanding of the Bible? Why are people so willing to hang on for dear life? Don't they teach us in divinity school?
That was my knee jerk. I got my iPhone right up there and texted Marci.
Yeah.
Others who got to see it?
Well, no matter what the daughter said and talked about, and he did attend some of the classes and all, that father would not get off his stance to the last words of that documentary. And it was, and I also texted Marci, and his daughter continued to love him and care for him. I mean, I think she could easily have decided, I can't have anything to do with this, but she didn't. And, she chose love.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the thing that came up in their relationship was they quit talking about it. They didn't address it.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't make her wrong, and she didn't make him wrong.
Was such a fundamentalist. Was one of the things was that, God made the earth in 7 days or 6 days. And they said, well, were they 24-hour periods? And he goes, yes. And it was like, oh, God. It's like being back in elementary school.
So for those of you who weren't here last week, I recommended this documentary on Amazon called 1946, and it's about the translations of the Bible in the New Standard Version, and it's really fascinating. The first time the term homosexuality came into the Bible, and it did not come into the Bible until 1946. Wow. It's a great story. It's a great documentary. Well worth the time to watch. So.
Well, I have a question on that. What was the translation that it came in 1946? What Bible translation?
It was in the New Standard Version. Yeah, New Standard Version. And they go through the whole kind of process of how it got in there, but also how it was intended to be pulled out. And then basically culture got a hold of it and ran with it. Yeah. Unfortunately, politics and culture got in bed together and ran with it. Yeah. Okay, anybody else thoughts, comments? We are going to dive into Sodom and Gomorrah, and it ain't pretty. Okay, let's go then. We'll go back into it. Okay, and again, here's what we're going to go through. Sodom and Gomorrah, Esau and Jacob, Joseph and his Technicolor. So we're still on, again, Hebrew scriptures. We're going to do that for the next 3 weeks, okay? So again, there are six passages that we're going to deal with over the course of these weeks. Basically the entirety of the anti-gay theology rests on these 6 passages. So the one we're going to take on today is Genesis 19.5, chapter 19, verse 5, and it is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And in particular, they call to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them. So there's 3 that are in the Old Testament. One is the story in Sodom and Gomorrah. And then next week, we're going to deal with the 2 Leviticus passages. So let's start with the reading in Genesis. So Steve London, will you read for us? Since I just love hearing you read.
Let me get, now I'm unmuted. There we go. There we go. Now I got to get my, there we go. Now I can see the screen again. Okay. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. He said, "Please, my Lord, turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you can rise early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the square." But he urged them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, so that we may know them." Lot went out of the door to the men, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Look, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof."
Okay. Interestingly enough, this is a Bible story that is not painted a lot. Now, what is painted a lot is what comes after it, which is Lot leaving with his family, and then God raining down the destruction on Sodom and Gomorrah. So here's what happens in the story. These two angels, and what's really critical here is this is a piece of a story, of a larger story. So these two angels had appeared earlier in Genesis, and they had actually been meeting with Abraham. And they had come to Abraham, and they had met with Abraham earlier on. And now they were walking on, and they had come on to Sodom. And they had told Abraham that they were going to go to Sodom and destroy it for its sinfulness. And then Abraham and Sodom had gotten into this argument. And this was the time where Abraham had argued with God and said, you know, if you could find 50 righteousness people, would you destroy the city? And God, you know, so that was that whole argument. And those are those two angels that are coming. And so they go into Sodom, and Lot is going to greet them with that same type of respectfulness and hospitality that Abraham showed them earlier on in Genesis. And he is going to insist that they not stay out in the courtyard. They're going to stay in his house. He's going to show them that hospitality. He's going to bake bread for them. He's going to prepare a meal for them. But what we find out very quickly that Lot's hospitality is not representative of what's really going on in Sodom. It's very unique. And an angry crowd shows up to rape, to sexually assault, violently assault these two men. And Lot instead offers up his two virgin daughters. And so the men try to break down the door. This violent crowd tries to break down the doors, but the angels strike them blind, and they basically thwart the attack. And then Lot and his family flee the city, and then God destroys the city. Right. So that's basically the story. Okay. Here's some of the interesting things there. So this word here. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them." And again, when I put up any of the scripture, I'm always going to use the NRSV. So this is all NRSV, so that we may know them. So let's talk about that right here. To know is in the Bible hundreds and hundreds of times. Only 10 of them are sexual, and this is one of them. So in this context, this is not a romantic interest in Lot's guests. They are threatening to gang rape these two angels, right? They are not acting out of some type of same-sex desire. They are threatening sexual violence against Lot's guests, right? And they are basically warning all outsiders to stay away by this really threatening behavior. And this threatened rape of the angels is really an attempt to feminize them, declaring them that they are not real men, right? What's really clear about this text is it is about sex. It is about abuse. It is not about sex. This is a text that is clearly about a violent abuse. So what is the actual sin of Sodom? So the sin was the actual sin of Sodom was the lack of justice done in the name of Sodom's basically vulnerable and not showing hospitality to those living on the margins. And that was the sin that earlier on in Genesis, God was arguing with Abraham about, and those angels that were heading to Sodom. So this was in Genesis 16 when the Lord said, how great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, how very grave their sin. So this is 2 chapters before this incident happens. God is already worried about Sodom and Gomorrah's sin, right? That chapter 18 hasn't happened. God's already worried about their sin. He has to go down there and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know, right? So this is already a concern for God, and the sin was not taking care of the most vulnerable in the society, the orphan, the widow, and the aliens. And how do we know that with so much confidence? And we do. We know it with so much confidence because it shows up in multiple places in the Bible. It's in Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah, and even Jesus is going to talk about it in Matthew. And so in Matthew, he's actually going to talk about this as an example of his disciples not being shown hospitality. And he's going to say, if anybody will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet as you leave that town. Truly, I tell you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of the just judgment than in that town. It's about being welcomed. That's what Jesus is talking about in that example. So that's how we know it with such confidence what the sin is of Sodom. Okay. So how did it make it into the Big Six? Now, this is one of the most famous Bible passage that deals with homosexuality. And many and most Christians have heard or learned at some point in their lives that the sin that caused God to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah was same-sex behavior, right? And for years, it has been assumed to be homosexuality. But it was actually centuries after Christ that this connection was made. Early rabbinical writings attested that throughout early Judaism, the link did not exist between Sodom, sin, and homosexuality. And it wasn't until the 11th century that the term sodomoia and sodomy was invited to mean the same-sex act from the biblical text. So when we think of sodomite, we think of homosexual act. That tying that to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, that did not happen until the 11th century. Okay. Okay. And then, from that point on, this understanding has been that God condemned and punished the citizens of Sodom, the Sodomites, for that activity.
It's a duck.
Okay. Here's the biggest irony in this. Oh, the actual sin of Sodom was the lack of hospitality and welcome, something that currently the LGBT community is feeling deeply and has felt deeply by the church. So that's the irony of the story. So this is a big one. This is one of the big six. So before we move on, questions, comments on this?
Okay.
Anything that's not clear?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is, say in Yale Divinity School or whatever, but someplace that's considered scholarly, do they teach this viewpoint? And so how long have they done that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is what I learned in the,
It's what you learn.
oh,
But would other, what we used to call mainstream churches, they learn it this way too?
yeah.
Or where did we get so off the track about that?
I think if you watch 1946, they talk about politically what happens in the 70s and 80s where politics and religion mix, and how the
Mhm.
Bible, actually the politics, religion, and the Bible become this really almost violent combination.
Yeah.
And it's when that happens that it basically goes off the rails.
Well, see, I thought I heard it in the 50s.
Oh, I'm sure it was in the 50s too. I'm sure it was in the 50s too, before then. Yes.
One quick question about the actual sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, because I've always been confused in Genesis 18 verse 20. After he has talked with Abraham, he says, "Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know." That, is there any other, because I what we never are told what the outcry is or anything.
No, that's it. It's completely out of context, which in honestly, Genesis, there are wild card out of context things in there throughout Genesis. So not surprising, like there's stories that duplicate each other. There's stories that like stories that replicate from different perspectives. So but there's no background or context for that statement. No.
Okay.
It's in other places that we find it. Yeah. Okay, everybody good on this one? It's a big one. We're going to cross it off the list. So we're down to 5. Okay, let's go down to Esau and Jacob and 2 genders. And so this is the story on Esau and Jacob. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skilled hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field. Okay, so this is the story of the 2 sons of Isaac. And again, Isaac is Abraham and Sarah's only child. So they are the twins born to Isaac and Rebekah, Esau and Jacob. And Esau, red and hairy, outdoor man, hunter. So he really represents kind of heteronormative masculinity. He's a patriarchal ideal. He is loved by his father. He is the firstborn. He is entitled to all from his father. Jacob is the quiet man living in tents. Now, the tent is women's space in ancient times. And Jacob is not only living in the women's space, but he is doing women's work. So he is taking on the feminine role. And Jacob is loved by his mother. So with the help of his mother, Jacob fools his blind, aging father into giving his birthright blessing. So as the firstborn, Esau should inherit everything. And Rebekah and Jacob trick Isaac into giving it all to Jacob. And Esau is so furious that he's going to murder his brother. These are the 2 brothers painted through time. And the trickery. So Jacob, the second born, becomes the head of the family and the patriarch. But Jacob doesn't change anything. So Jacob's story goes on so that Jacob has all of these wives who also hate each other, and they battle for power against each other's. And Jacob's sons are going to do the exact same thing to each other that Jacob and Esau did to each other. And they're even going to subjugate Joseph, their youngest brother, to incredible violence. So it's almost like Jacob, who is basically the outcast in the story, gets the power and then doesn't change the system, instead becomes the system itself and propagates the system and continues it on. So some big takeaways from this one and kind of the gender roles is that these gender roles, they were placed at birth, so they're not binding. So Jacob has this gender role initially kind of living in tents, but throughout Jacob's story as it evolves, he really becomes the patriarch of his story with all of these wives. And that, gender roles matter to humans, not to God. And if we get power, we really need to consider how we dismantle those systems that have oppressed us, not continue the systems now that we have power, right? And that God knows us, the real us, and isn't deceived by what's going on around us. And God is eager to bless us. Esau and Jacob, two genders. Okay, we're going to talk about Joseph and his Technicolor coat. So then God remembered Rachel. Now remember, so let's just put this in context. Joseph is Jacob's youngest son. So Jacob is grown up now, and he has moved away because he was chased out because he was fearful for his life. He started another life. And he had many wives. And one of his favorite was Rachel. But Rachel couldn't have children for a long, long time. So. Then God remembered Rachel, and God heeded her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach, and she named him Joseph, saying, may the Lord add to me another son. Now Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming and 400 men with him, so he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and 2 maids. He put the maids with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brother. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report to them to their father. Now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than any other of his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him an ornamented robe. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his other brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. This is not one passage. I just pulled out different passages to give you the little sense of Joseph. So Joseph is Jacob's favorite child. And so much so that when Jacob goes back to make peace with Esau, he puts Rachel and Joseph at the back of the line so that if everybody else dies, they're at the back of the line. Joseph is not the wisest of children. So even though he is favored by his father, he is kind of a tattletale. So he tells his dad what's going on about him. But because he was his favored son, Jacob made him this ornamental robe. Now we think of this, as probably Donny Osmond and Joseph in his Technicolor coat, to those of you who are familiar with that one. But this created so much envy with Joseph and his brothers. So this is some depictions of Joseph and his coat and the envy that created. So Joseph not only was favored by his brother, But Joseph had dreams. So once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brother, they hated him even more. And he said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." And his brother said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. And he had another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornamental robe that he wore, and they took him and threw him in a pit. The pit was empty and there was no water in it. And when some midnight traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So again, not a complete passage. I'm pulling different Joseph pieces here. So again, Joseph is born late in life, so he's the favorite, right? And his dad demonstrates this by giving his this special garment, this multicolored coat, which makes his brothers hate him a lot. And Joseph doesn't handle life well. You know, he tells his brothers he's going to lord over him one day. He tells his brothers he has these dreams, right? That he's going to have this power one day. And his brothers sell him into slavery in Egypt. Initially, they were going to kill him, and then they were convinced to sell him into slavery. Okay, so here's what's really important in this story is this story comes directly after the story of the rape of Dinah, which is one of the most brutal stories in the Bible. Now, those of you who took the Genesis class with me might remember this story. And in this story, Jacob's son, basically, Jacob convinces the king and all of his male followers to become circumcised. And when they become circumcised and are at their weakest, Jacob and his sons and followers all go in and kill them all violently in payment for basically raping Dinah. And it is the whole story is told from the perspective of Dinah's father and the brothers upon receiving word of her sexual assault, right? And how they want to exact this violent revenge against the inhabitants of the city where Dinah was raped. And the reason for this violent outrage against the city was because it was an insult to Jacob that she was raped. It had anything to do with her ordeal. It was an insult to Jacob that this happened. And that's why they kill everybody when they're at their weakest, and then they steal all their livestock and their women, right? So it's this whole story of Dinah's rape is a story of how the perceived honor of Jacob's sons and Jacob have been insulted by somebody raping Jacob's daughter and their sister. This is the story that immediately precedes basically Joseph's, right? Okay, so how does that kind of shape the story of Joseph then? So Joseph kind of as an outcast, as an otherness, Joseph throughout time has really been understood as the young gay son. And if we understand that context in the context of this prior story of the violence of his brother, it kind of takes on a different meaning in terms of what Joseph was living in. It's really less a story than about a Technicolor coat. And it's more a story about a young man as other growing up really surrounded by violence and threats of violence. And it's a story of family members who ultimately cast out the different one and actually sell the different one to get rid of him. It's a pretty horrific story. But unfortunately, it's a story that has a lot of parallels to things that have happened through time for a lot of folks in the LGBTQ community. So. Jacob grieves horrifically, this one. So in both the story of Jacob's younger years and Joseph, there's a lot of otherness in them. So the question for reflection I'm going to send you off in is, what is it about otherness that seems to scare people so much and incite violence in our world? And is there anything that could be done to stop it or offset it? Again, the question is, what is it about otherness that seems to scare people so much and incite such violence? And then is there anything that can be done to stop it or offset it? It's a big question. And both of those stories in Genesis speak to that otherness and the violence that is incited by it. So I'm going to send you out into 2 breakout rooms for probably, I'll probably give you about 8 or 9 minutes for this one because it's a big one. And I hope that you can solve it during that time.
Yeah, really.
Make sure I got you split up here. Okay, go ahead. Everybody got the question okay?
Mhm.
I'll see you back in about 9 minutes. Welcome back. Okay, did y'all solve it?
Oh,
No.
yeah.
What'd you come up with?
That people are afraid of something different,
Yeah.
of something new. And we decided that men are probably more afraid, and I'm not talking about you, Steve, but about this is their masculinity, and it's against their masculinity or how they feel about themselves, and I think it scares them.
So fear is a big driver.
Yeah.
And I tend to think that the more exposure that we each get to people from, whether it's on the gender issue or whether it's on whatever, different culture, whatever, a different race, the more exposure we have, the better chance we have of meeting and knowing personally people who are said to not be just like us, but I tend to think if you could really look at their insides and their heart, they're the same. But anyway, the more exposure that we can have. And I always felt it was kind of fortunate for me that I lived in a number of different places, including 4 years of the military. And so lots of people from lots of situations.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I had to talk about the Catholic Church. But because, I was raised in it and the message given is the one true religion, right? That's drilled into you.
Mm-hmm.
So, there was no opportunity to ever go to another church. The family just wouldn't do that. It was not allowed, so not exposed to anything else but that. So of course, my father particularly looked down on Jewish people or, of other religions because, the Catholic Church was the only true one. And, I think that's true. And then the other churches that think theirs is. And so, kind of an interfaith thing didn't happen as I was growing up. That would never have happened.
Now, Steve, for me, my father worked in an industry where most of the people were Jewish, and he was one of the outsiders. And So I remember in high school, I met this guy in Balboa named Steve Katz. God, it's a long time ago. And he was going to pick me up for a date. And my father said, he's Jewish, isn't he? And I said, yes. And he said, you know, that makes no difference.
Yeah, see?
And I said, yes, I understand that, Daddy. So that's how my parents played it, because they had too many friends that were of something other than Catholic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a difference.
Exposed?
Yeah.
That message.
Yeah. Okay. So offsetting the fear. Oh, go ahead, Marie. Oh, you're on mute, Marie.
Yeah. Steve had this comment about, because I always think it's the one religion, the one God religions. I was in a class and some ministers said, oh no, it's the one God religions that fight the most, like Islam and Christianity, you know, have the Crusades and things like that. And now. And so if there's only one God, that's like, okay, anybody else isn't really the true religion. They're just wrong. But Steve said, yeah, but in Christianity, the one God became humble enough to become a human in Jesus Christ. So then, if you're humble, maybe you're not the only right one. I thought that was a great thing to say about the humility.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just put it a little bit kind of in context. We approached when we started our group in, what creates the other. Fear for sure is one part, but it's also the other is the repulsion against the question, how shall we live? How do we determine what is right or wrong? Once we have knowledge that we know the truth, whatever truth happens to be, then we are capable of evil, just as it is in Genesis 2. Or Genesis 1? What did we do? We ate of the tree of good and evil. So once you know good, once you become certitude of that good, you are capable of evil, and then you can create the others because you're afraid of them. They're challenging the way you live, and so on.
Oof. This one's a really hard one, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is the crux of all of this. So. Okay, so next week we're taking on Leviticus, and we're going to start by talking about what the word abomination means. And we'll do some context on what exactly Leviticus is, because I think that's really critical to understand what it is and why it was written, because that really does give us the key to what those passages mean. And the crux of the matter is, with all of these passages, they don't mean what you think they mean. So, so that's where we're going to get to at the end of that. And then we're going to look at the story of Ruth and Naomi, and we're going to look at the story of David and Jonathan. And if we have time, we'll keep going into Isaiah. So making good time, and I'll see you all in a week. And just come with any questions back, and I'll see you here next Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Everybody, see ya.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.